right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's 10 o'clock Back on Track session. Iowa College Aid and ICANN are hosting the variety of events this week to help prepare students and families for their post-secondary adventures. And you can find the link for the remainder of the week Back on Track sessions in the chat. We're excited right now to have with us Mark Salisbury from Tuition Fit, and he's going to talk with us about the financial aid negotiation. But first, a couple housekeeping tips. As you may have noticed, the Zoom meeting is being recorded. And so if you have a question, you can go ahead and unmute yourself or type it into the chat. Otherwise, we do ask that you keep yourselves muted and throughout the Zoom session so that we can reduce the amount of noise in the background. And if you're looking for the recording after the fact, we will be sending them out next week to school counselors. So please talk to the school counselor in your school. I believe that's it. We'll get started right away. So our session with Mark, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you. Best intro ever. Okay. Awesome to see a couple of folks that were with us for the last session. And yeah, it's going to be fun because this is kind of a, I don't know, dive into something that nobody thought you could do a couple decades ago, and you rarely could a couple of decades ago. But now it really is something that is a pretty regular occurrence. And we should just start by saying it out loud. Colleges will negotiate. They will. They will negotiate. But very important note, use the word appeal. Because colleges, they're not comfortable calling it negotiation, even though it's actually what it is. They like to use the word appeal. So use the word appeal. That will be helpful. How to help your students appeal, receive a better college price. That's what this whole presentation is going to be about. I want to say this right out of the gate, just to make clear. This is not a guarantee. It never is. But there are things you can do to really improve the likelihoods, which I know of a couple of institutions that last year basically told me that 8 out of 10 people that just called and asked for more money, they just gave it to them. 8 out of 10. Now, only about 10% of the students that were accepted reached out. So school accepts a whole bunch of students. Only 10% of them actually asked, but those 10%, 8 out of 10. And it wasn't like that 10% were all people who had very special, critical cases of need that were so obvious that it was an easy decision. No. This is actually built into the way that colleges do what they do now. So this is something that you could take advantage of, and the likelihoods are quite high that if you play this out right, you're going to have a lot of opportunity to improve your final price by engaging in this stage of the process. So just a little bit of an agenda just to give you a sense of what we're going to do. I want to talk a little bit about just general context, sort of what this really is looking like from the 40,000 foot level. Then I'm going to pull back the curtain and just sort of show you a little bit what this looks like from the perspective of a college. And then I want to give you some strategic suggestions about how to play this out in such a way that you really are in the best position to get more money. So, colleges failing to meet enrollment goals by May 1st since 2010. This is kind of amazing. But May 1st was traditionally always the date when, yeah, we're done with admissions. We got all our students. We made everybody's full. We're good. And then the admission staff can go out in the summer and take some time off and maybe even help out with summer camp. But May 1st, everything's done. Since 2010, this has been a 3-time increase. It was 150 schools or so that would say by at the end of May 1st, you know what, we still have room. And now it's over 600 schools a year that are saying, oh yeah, we still got room. And there's actually now a site that gathers that information and organizes it so that you can go and look and see what schools are still looking for students. This number is a pretty substantial number because it just gives you a sense of how many more students, how many more schools are still recruiting after May 1st. They don't have their class. They still need to get more students. Now, forget about May 1st for a second. What about September 1st? Like when school actually starts? Before the pandemic, 7 out of 10 colleges and universities said, yeah, you know what, we missed our enrollment goals. We either didn't get enough students or we got enough students, but they're not paying as much as we had hoped they would, so we didn't quite make our budget. 2020, yes, bananas year, but still 8 out of 10 colleges and universities missed enrollment goals. Now, what that says, it's not telling us that in 2021 it's going to be 9 out of 10, but what it is telling us is this is the context in which the colleges sit, that they know that they really have to get students to come, and they have to figure out a way to make that happen, because colleges know that if they don't get the students to enroll, then they're never going to be there when they're sophomores and juniors and seniors. And when the college increases their tuition, but leaves the scholarship that they've offered your student at a dollar amount so that you actually end up paying more the next year. If you're not there as a freshman, then they'll never have that chance. So they know they need to get the students as freshmen. And here's the kicker of that context. So in 2025, the number of students graduating from high school nationally starts to drop like a stone. And it just keeps going even past 2029 into the middle of the 2030s. This is what colleges are looking at it. And they've coined a term, they call it the demographic cliff, where there's not nearly enough students to go around as it is. What's going to happen coming up? So the colleges are even more focused now on than ever. Before we hit that cliff, let's get as many students as we can enrolled now, because their chances of getting them enrolled drop even more when there are few students graduating from high school. So that's the context that the colleges are in. That's the larger sort of demographic context. Now let's pull back the curtain, because the way things look right now for most folks is that college admissions seems to be this really complicated thing with big data, artificial intelligence, algorithms everywhere, work in social media, the whole thing. Let's not kid ourselves. It's a billion-dollar industry, this enrollment management industry, with companies that are very, very well off selling their wares to colleges and universities for 6 and 7 figures annually, that help the colleges sort of try to figure out what they're doing and how they're doing it. It's really kind of amazing what that industry does and how it does it. But from the perspective of us as consumers, it really does look like this is this really complicated thing and the colleges have all the power and you don't. So let's just pull back the curtain and look at what it looks like for your typical college. And I think it's important to say typical because it gets a little different if you're a school that's extremely popular, big national brand name, and gets 100,000 applications and you're only taking in 1,000 freshmen. That's a different setting. But most colleges aren't that. Most students aren't even thinking about applying to those schools. So let's set that small group of schools aside for a second. So pulling back the curtain here, colleges go into every spring knowing 2 things. They know that they need a certain number of students, paying on average a certain price in order to meet their full budget, keep the lights on, to give salary increases to employees, just run the place. But they also know, especially after the last decade, that as students start to deposit they've been accepted, they send in their tuition deposit and say, yes, I'm coming. As they watch that process in the spring, patterns emerge that means things don't go quite according to plan, and then they have to adjust and they'll have to adapt. So they've got all kinds of contingencies of how they're going to plan and how they're going to adapt to try their best to get at, we need X number of students, say we need 500 freshmen, and on average, those freshmen are paying $20,000 a year. That means some students are paying more than $20,000, some students are paying less, but overall, on average, they're paying $20,000 a year. So that's what colleges know when they go into every spring. So to split up that, we need X number of students paying Y average price, they know that the students are going to vary. They're not all going to be exactly the same. So the colleges organize their pricing strategy with a series of different price points. So not every student's going to get the same offer. And we sort of know that, right? But it's useful to sort of break that out. So each of these different subcategories, there's a target number of students that the college is going to try to recruit and try to get to come. And for each of those subcategories, it's a different target average price. So of that 500 students at that hypothetical place, they might say, well, we want 100 of those students, and they're going to pay $25,000. And then we need another 100 students that look different than that first 100, and they're going to pay $15,000. And it's all about an average price for that subgroup of students. So every college has something that they call their pricing matrix. And the pricing matrix looks essentially like this. On the vertical, you've got academic status. You can call it merit if you want. And generally, that's unweighted high school GPA. Test score used to be in that much more than it is now, but it's still there. It hasn't gone away entirely, even though a lot of schools have said they're test optional. They'll still use it. So on the vertical, you've got at the very top, students that have amazing academic merit. And then down at the bottom, students that, not that great, but they've been accepted. And then across the bottom, you have the family financial status, the student's financial status. And let's just think of financial status as going from having lots and lots of need, which would be on the left, to having no need, being very affluent on the right. So in general, across all of these different cells, the students in the upper left have high need and blow the doors down academically. Those students get the best package. They get the lowest price. They get a ton of academic money. The school finds ways to bring in need-based money through Pell and different things. That student gets the best price, the lowest price. And then conversely, the student that's down in the bottom right, that very affluent, but not a great student, just barely gets into the school, that student's probably going to get the worst package. They're not going to get very much merit money, maybe none at all. They might have a little bit of something here and there, but they're going to be asked to pay the highest price. And then within those cells, all this stuff that sets up and varies differentially. Now, remember what I said, that we're talking about within each cell, you need a certain number of students at an average price. So remember we were talking earlier, we got two different cells, and we got one group, we want 100 students paying $25,000 on average, and another one, we want 100 students paying $15,000 on average. Now, within each of those cells, because you're thinking about it on an average, there's wiggle room. Because as deposits come in, you're sort of paying attention to that spread, the variation of prices that students are willing to pay as they deposit. because that then affects whether you're going to come out ahead of that average or below that average. So all of that means that there's room in there. They've built into the model because they're expecting this to have to play out in ways that they can't exactly predict. So what this means is you've got room, and as a school, when you're offering a student a price, when you accept them and you send them this wonderful letter, we're so thrilled that you're coming to our school, or we're so thrilled that we applied, we would love to have you here, and here's our financial aid offer, we're going to give you a bunch of scholarship money. You're going to offer that student not below that average price that you want to get in that subgroup. You're not going to just offer just the average either. You're going to offer slightly above it so that you've got some room to wiggle. So what that means is, today especially, the first offer that you receive is rarely the best price that college is willing to give you. And they're hoping that you won't appeal. Remember I said earlier that most schools said about 10% of the students that they accepted actually reached out and said, can you give us a better price? So the school's expecting that a whole bunch of students won't appeal, they won't ask, they'll just, yeah, okay, I'm coming, because they don't know any different. But they've built into the model room for people to ask for more money and for them to give it to them. So with that knowledge, what you want to do is position yourself in such a way that you've got the best information and the best case to make, so that when you ask for more money, you really are going to get it. And maybe you're going to get it from all the schools that you got accepted to, because why just negotiate with one of them? Why not negotiate with all of them and see if you can use that information to then drive your price down further? So start with the end in mind means think about this whole process as something that sets up your ability to successfully appeal. And that means that from the very beginning of building a college list, you want to be thinking about how the results of that list that you build impact your ability then to negotiate later. So one of the things that means is you want to think about building a college list where the list of schools that you apply to are all going to be schools that you have a good chance of getting into and that will be in your price range. Because then if you have a lot of acceptances from schools that are all going to be in a price range that makes sense for you, now you'll have more leverage, more information, you'll be able to negotiate. So we're going to think about the beginning of this process in a really important way to set you up for that later stage where you've got more leverage to negotiate. Now, while you're going through the search process and while you're talking to schools, this is something that is not so great, but it's a reality. And it's not really that nefarious, but it's just the reality of playing out as you want to play it out. Some folks will tell you, you got to show lots of interest. Tell these schools how much you like them, be the first one in line at the tour and write them lots of emails and send them cookies. You don't actually want to show too much interest in any given school, because the schools have algorithms underneath all of the process that they're using that essentially allows them to predict which students are most likely to accept an offer of admission. And the more interest you show, the more that algorithm is going to say, if you offer this kid acceptance and you offer them this scholarship, they're coming, because our algorithm suggests that they've showed tons of interest, and so they must be super interested. Sometimes what that means is that the college will then offer you a price that's a little bit more expensive than they would offer you otherwise, because they're anticipating that you have decided that this is a school that you're just dying to go to, and you'll go there no matter what they charge you. So be professional, be respectful, do all of the things you would do, but don't act like you're showing your hand in a sort of way that's just begging to go there, because that might turn around and affect the price that you actually are offered if you get in. Lastly, don't send an enrollment deposit in prior to appealing, because once you've sent that deposit in, you give up a little bit of power and you position yourself more in a way where you have to beg. And of course, if you send the deposit in, the school doesn't have to give it to you, give that money back if you choose to go somewhere else. So hold on to that deposit. Now, some schools will tell you, oh, you got to get that in by such and such a date. All you have to do is contact them and tell them, look, this is a challenge trying to make a decision. We really need to be smart about this. And money is an issue, like it should be, because this is an expensive thing. They will give you more time. They will give you more time. And they might ask to sort of set a deadline with you, but they'll give you more time. Even then, once you get past that deadline, they'll still give you more time. So, but never send an enrollment deposit in prior to an appeal, because then you sort of give up your power. Lastly, what you want to do is, we all want this. We want the college. We want to get the college to yes. We want to get the school that you're asking for more money from to say, yep, sure, great, glad to. So how do you do that? Well, first of all, remember this. They already accepted you for admission. They're not going to get mad at you for asking for more money. They're going to hear from lots of students who are asking for more money because college is expensive. And because the way the process sets up, lots of people are going to be surprised by the offer that they've got. So you're already accepted for admission. That means they want you to enroll. They want to sort of close the deal, for lack of a better term. So there's not going to be any mad. Now, if you're a jerk, that's a different story, but they want you to enroll. So, and by the way, just know this, like, they send out thousands of acceptance letters and then never hear a sniff from the people they sent the acceptance letter to. And then that student doesn't enroll and they don't know anything about why. So if you've reached out to them and you appeal, that's good. That from their perspective, that's good, because then there's a chance that this student's going to enroll. So remember, you've already been accepted for admission. They want you to enroll. You shouldn't be afraid to reach out and ask for more money. Even when it's your top choice college, even if it's already the best price of the schools you've applied to, and even if they say they don't negotiate, there's lots of schools that will tell you that they don't negotiate. And what they really mean is, we don't like the word negotiate, but they absolutely will listen to appeals and oftentimes grant them. Even if all of those things are true, ask for more financial aid. You'll never get it if you don't ask for it. And remember, in their pricing models, they've built in wiggle room. So in most cases, there's already room for them to just look and say, you know what? Yep, we can offer you another couple $1,000s. That's built into our model. Now, the reasons that a school will give, the reasons that a school will use to justify a price improvement, giving you a better financial aid package, they have to have a reason. Shocking, right? Totally reasonable, though, that you have to have a reason, because the person who's making that decision is a mid-level employee and they have to justify it to somebody. The categories that they sort of put those reasons in sort of fall into three within a combination. There's the financial category, There's some issue that's about just purely about financial need. There's the merit category, that some other recognition of curricular or co-curricular success that wasn't fully recognized when you applied. There's another school that's offered the student a better price, and we need to match it or get close. And then there's always the sort of combination thereof. All of those things play out, and the college just needs a reason, because they need to be able to justify it. And as long as they've got a reason that they can feel good about, that helps them, because they want to get to yes, because they want you to enroll. So when you reach out to a school, think about framing what you say in this way. First, you're very grateful to them. And this is kind of amazing, but it's true. Every year, schools hear from some parent who's just mad and wants to vent that that school didn't give their kid more money because their kid's special. They get that phone call, and that right away sets things in a bad way. So if you start out with, thank you so much, the opportunity to come to your school. We've really been impressed by the way you treated our student. Our student loves this, loves that. And you're really kind and generous about the opportunity. That's a great, really important way to start all of the conversation. The second thing is you position your conversation with them in that it does cost money to go to college, and it does require some sort of sacrifice from us as a family, because we're not just thinking about the college decision for this particular student. We've got maybe other students coming along, or we've got other financial issues we're trying to resolve, or we've got elderly parents, or we're thinking about our retirement, or we had some other financial event years ago that shaped our financial situation long into the future. But it is a challenge. And so we're really focused on how do we find the opportunity that has the sort of best mix of the cost is reasonable, the value strong, and the return on investment is going to be worth it. And there's lots of different things at different schools that are sort of trade-offs, right? You could do this or you could do that. One's not necessarily better, they're just different. But when you're talking to the school, you can just convey that this is a real challenge for us because we're trying to make this work. And maybe it's going to require us to borrow. And you can always say it's just more than we wanted to borrow because we didn't really want to borrow. Or it's going to mean that we have to sacrifice this or that. Whatever it is, you want to position this, that it's a challenge to make this work, this price work, because we're trying to weigh cost and value and ROI. You don't want to start with the school down the street gave me a bunch more money, and so you need to match it or else. But you start with just framing your own position, your own situation. And this has to be a genuine thing. And the college needs to see that it's genuine. So frame your request through this lens. And then they may ask you if you have other offers, if there's another school that offers. They may ask you more questions, and feel free to tell them that, yes, this other school has offered a better price, or we've seen by using Tuition Fit, the company that I created, that you see other prices out there offered to similar students that are attractive given your context. But don't turn this into, unless you match the price I got from this other school down the road, I'm not coming. You want to frame it as that's other information that's shaping the way we're thinking about this. Now, you'll need to be ready to show something. So if someone asks about, because if you've made the case, we have financial challenges, maybe somebody's job was reduced over the past couple of years or something else came up, you're going to need to be able to show that. And so you want to pull together evidence of that. One thing that is oftentimes really helpful is if you can show that your student received some sort of academic award or achieved some kind of academic success or co-curricular success after the time that you submitted your application. And a lot of times that comes in the form of maybe not being selected to an honor society, maybe it's improving your GPA, maybe it's getting a better test score, maybe it's being recognized in the community for some volunteer work. And it's things that happened in the winter or spring of your senior year of high school that weren't things that you put on the application because you sent the application in back in the fall. So when you have things like that, you can introduce those things to say, these are things that have happened since then, and maybe there's some way for you to recognize that, and maybe that helps qualify for some additional aid. Then finally, be ready, if you have such, to be able to say that we either have an offer from another college, or we have spoken with another college and we're beginning the process of applying to another school that we know from other resources would give us a better price. However you have that, you're strongest if you've already gotten an award letter from another school, but colleges know that lots of schools are still looking for students all the way through the summer. So you can still say, we're still looking for a school that fits our price range if that offer doesn't quite fit it from the school you're talking to. But if you've got competing offers, you want to have that at the ready, because sometimes they'll just ask for it. And lastly, I should say, you don't have to tell the school that they need to get to a specific price, but in your mind, have a sense of, if they come down from 25,000 to 23,000, then we can make that work. Have in your mind that spot where you'd be comfortable saying yes, because it is really helpful to be able to go into a school if you end up talking to them, especially if you meet with them in person, they may ask, like, what do you need to get to? What makes, if you can have an answer and say, we'll deposit today if you can get us down to 21, then all they have to do is figure out a way to get to 21. And if this sounds like the negotiation when you're trying to get a car, and the salesperson says, well, let me talk to my manager. Yeah, it's just like that. It's just like that. So the last thing that is super important here, you're not going to be very successful in trying to negotiate a better price if you go into that school and say, we're coming, but we want a better price. Then the school is just going to say, sorry to make you mad today, but we'll see you in the fall. You have to be ready and willing to walk away. And so that's why when you build this college search list at the beginning, and then you send in applications, that you really have organized the way you're thinking in such a way that there's several colleges that you really believe can work. And if one doesn't, another one will. And your student is of the mind that they're the one that drives their success, that the college doesn't define them, that they define their success. So then if a school says, you know what, we can come down a little bit, but it's not where you need it to be, and another one says, yes, we'll be glad to get to the price you need, that you can pick one of them and walk away from the others. You have to be ready and willing to walk away. You can't go into this process trying to appeal and get a better price without that in your back pocket. So I've thrown a lot of information at you. We've talked about a lot of stuff here. I suspect that there are more than a few questions. So let's just have a conversation about this stuff. I'm going to actually stop the screen share and we can have a little bit better pictures of each other. If you want to flip on your camera, great. If you don't, fine. But let's just have a conversation, and I'm glad to answer any questions that folks have.
Hi, so thank you so much for your presentation. This was great. I have a senior this year, and you're right, this does feel like a huge process. You mentioned that this would not necessarily apply to like really big name schools. Is that correct? Did I understand you correctly?
So the only school that I have yet to hear about never, ever, ever negotiating is none of them.
Oh,
Every school has a story of being willing to negotiate. But that range of situations in which they'd be willing to negotiate gets narrower as they get more selective.
sure.
So Johns Hopkins, for example, school you've, I'm sure, heard of. They're pretty well known because they're really, really good. And they get tons of applicants and they are pretty selective. But if they've got a student that they've accepted that is also considering, let's just pick Yale and Duke, they negotiate. They will be glad to come up with a better price to try to get that student who was thinking about going to an Ivy and then another big name up and comer to get them to come to Hopkins. Now, if that student says, I'd love the better price from Hopkins, and where else are you talking to? And I mean, no offense by saying this, but I'm also talking to Augustana College and the University of Minnesota Mankato. Hopkins will say, look, just be happy you got in. We'd love to make this work. We can help you with some loans, but that's our price. So it's all about the context. And that's really important to know. So part of the reason why you really think about what's the list of schools that you decide to apply to, because the old school notion of pick a couple safeties, pick a couple targets, pick a couple reach schools, it actually undermines your ability to negotiate much. So, and it turns out that for a lot of folks, if they get into a reach school, it's a school they can't afford anyway, so it doesn't matter. So there's a different way to approach this process, which is target schools that if you get in, they'll be in a price range you can afford, and then you can use them to negotiate. But even the most selective place has an instance or two in which they're willing to negotiate. You'd think Grinnell right here in Iowa would never negotiate, but I'm here to tell you that they negotiate all the time when the student is talking about the University of Chicago and Williams and Harvey Mudd or Pomona, names that they're trying to compete with all the time.
Okay, so ISU would negotiate or appeal, or you could appeal with ISU, do you believe?
You're talking about Iowa State, not Illinois State?
I'm
right?
sorry, yes, Iowa State University.
That's all right. That's all right.
No, that's
just to make
okay.
sure. They will listen to appeals and they respond to those with better packages regularly. They don't do it all the time, but it very much depends on where you sit as a student compared to their other students, what kinds of other schools you're considering. But you never know if you don't ask.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
So I guess continuing with that, if your child does want to go like to Iowa State,
Mhm.
so if you want to have a competitive offer, should you do a different school that Iowa State would be so-called jealous of to try and, I guess probably that other school wouldn't offer a lower price though. I don't know, just trying to figure out how to play the game.
Yep. So if Iowa State, for example, if Iowa State is the school that your student wants to go to, and they're just sure that that's it, that's the best one, for whatever reason, then it makes a lot of sense to make sure that the other schools you apply to are, one, competitors, and it's based on the perception of Iowa State, right? You could think that, well, the University of Missouri is similar to Iowa State, but if you were particularly thinking about engineering, Iowa State might go, yeah, they're not a competitor of ours. So you want to make sure that you've applied to a set of schools that if you get into them and you get offers, that then you can use them. But remember also that you have to have the mindset that you have to be willing to walk away if the school just doesn't give you the price that you want to get. So if you are in a position where it's Iowa State or bust, then you're more likely to, even if you've applied to a couple of other places, you want to be able to make a great case to them, and you're probably not going to use a sort of competitive angle so much as you want to be able to make a case for financial need that hasn't really been taken into account so far. For example, when you do a FAFSA, you're talking about taxes that are 2 years ago, right? Folks here haven't, if you have a senior in high school, you haven't had the pleasure of doing the FAFSA yet. You will in a couple of weeks. You can't wait. It's so exciting. But you're going to be using 2-year-old tax returns to inform that FAFSA. And for lots and lots of people, their financial situation changed since those 2-year-old taxes and now. So you'll be able to make a case, you should be able to make a case that the financial situation has changed. And you want to really try to be able to make the case that some academic or co-curricular things have shown up that are very positive that you didn't know about when you applied. So if Iowa State is the school year, that's where we're going come hell or high water, then the competitive stuff might be helpful, but again, you're in state, and so the wiggle room is smaller, but you can use these other things to help them move your price somewhere. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Sure. What other questions do people have? Because there really are lots of like, well, in my situation, it's this, and everybody's situation is different. So
Does this process usually, when you say write a letter, are you assigned like a specific counselor or a representative from the college? I'll just say Iowa State just to
yeah, well, and it's good to sort of identify what kind of college you're talking about, because Iowa State, big place. So they're going to have lots more students in that pipeline when they're thinking about potential students to enroll as freshmen. So you really do need to have a person that you've sort of talked to, and they oftentimes will have one of the financial aid staff assigned to certain students. So when you're at a small college, if you're talking to a small college, they may only have 2 or 3 people in the financial aid office, and you'll always get the same person. So when you're talking to a big school, it is really important that, and this is actually a really useful strategy. Once you get your acceptance letter and you get a financial aid offer or scholarship letter or something like that, the first thing you do is just make a phone call, and it can be the parent. It doesn't have to be the kid. Some people make a big deal about that. But you make a phone call to the financial aid office and you get an appointment with one of their counselors. And the first thing you do is just say, so excited we got in, so excited to get this offer. I just want to make sure I'm understanding this correctly. And you may already understand it pretty well, but you use that as the avenue to have them walk you through that offer. Gives you a chance to sort of build a rapport with somebody and have a good first positive conversation with a person that you then have their name, they have your name. And so you've got something sort of established that that's the person that then you can contact later. So start with that, because that helps to sort of build a rapport that's a cooperative rapport instead of an antagonistic rapport. Start with something like that. And then a month later, whatever it is, then it's reach out by email or phone, although a lot of times folks now prefer email because they want to have a paper, should call it a paper trail, a pixel trail, an email trail of the communication. But you've got somebody now that you can communicate with, and you're always, thanks for the time you've taken to help me understand all this stuff. It's really complicated, but we're really trying to make this work. And that person is your contact. And so you have a history of a conversation that has started in a cooperative way, and you can use that rapport then so that you can continue that process and eventually ask for a better financial aid package. It looks like there was a question in the chat here. How does the FAFSA family expected contribution play into the process? So when you fill out the FAFSA is going to ask for a bunch of tax information, some stuff about assets. It's trying to complete this formula that results in the expected family contribution, the EFC. And it really is a kind of bizarre space that we're in, that we've got this tool that was originally designed just to sort of identify somebody who's going to qualify for need-based aid, the Pell Grant, the subsidized loan, and is under this threshold of, okay, now they're in a position where they really meet the threshold for having serious financial need. But what colleges have sort of done is they've translated that EFC into a way for them to say, well, it's not us that's decided what your price is going to be. It's the federal government's formula that just forces us to say, well, you could pay X, and so we're expecting you to pay X. So schools tend to use the FAFSA result, the EFC, as a, well, it says that you can pay $20,000 a year, so that's what we're going to go with. In decades ago, when there were a lot more students wanting to go to college than there were spots, the college could sort of get away with that. And if you're looking at private institutions that are generally more selective and they use a form called the CSS profile, which is essentially the FAFSA on Bruce Banner steroids, that makes the form that much more frustrating and much longer and definitely puts you at even further disadvantage. It's all built in such a way to give you assign you a number that the school can then lean on. So the school's going to say that, but the school knows, and you can point out to them, that the data that's used to build that EFC is old, and it's pretty well known that that really doesn't always capture somebody's real financial situation. But that's how it's set up. It doesn't always work that way, but that's the way it's set up. And it looks like there's some other folks putting some stuff into the chat that allows you to sort of compare information. But it's one of the things that Tuition Fit does, is when you share financial aid offer letters with Tuition Fit, you get to see both how your own offer letters set up in terms of the actual price the school's actually offering, asking you to pay, and then all of the offer letters that similar students like yours have received from whatever colleges they got them from, so that then you can really put your prices in context and start to see, yeah, we are getting kind of the short end of the stick in terms of what other students are getting, or, you know what, the price we got is actually a pretty good price and it's pretty reasonable. Now you have a way to compare that. That's the way the Tuition Fit works. And it just does give you more leverage and more information so you can make a more informed decision. Any other questions that people have?
So you mentioned this Tuition Fit. Is this a free website that we can just access
Yes.
easily, or, oh, okay.
Yeah, so it's a company that I started, a project I started a couple of years ago, and it's basically a way for all of us to put our information together so that then we benefit from the totality of it, this idea of crowdsourcing, right? So what happens at Tuition Fit when you have financial aid offer letters is you come to Tuition Fit, you build an account, you share those financial aid offer letters to Tuition Fit by just scanning them and putting them in. We redact all the private information, we anonymize everything. And as a function of sharing, you get to then see all of the offers that students like yours have shared from hundreds, thousands of students all over the country now at this point. And It's just a share and compare cooperative platform. So once you do that, now you've got this stuff and you can see all this information that other people are seeing, and then you can make some better choices about, or just more informed choices about, you know what, that's all the schools we applied to are too expensive, but hey, here's a bunch of other schools that are actually a lot less expensive. Let's call them up and see if they're taking applications. And most of them will be. Likewise, if you see that somebody else has got a much better price than you did to the same institution, well, now you're cooking with gas, as they say. You now have some leverage and some information that would be helpful. Somebody asked if tuition fit works for grad school. Right now, it's just about undergrad. Yes, the grad school situation is just as confusing and convoluted, and hopefully someday we'll be able to tackle that as well. But right now, tuition fit is just for undergrad.
All right. Well, it looks like you hit all of the questions that are in the chat.
Okay, good.
Are there any other questions?
I'm sure all this is a lot to take in, but the biggest thing I want people to come away from this with is this is not a situation where you have no power. This is a situation where you actually, as a consumer, have tremendous power, because the demographics, the supply and demand, if you will, just doesn't work in the college's favor anymore. There are lots of spots that colleges can't fill, and they need students and they have to keep the lights on. So this is so important, just to know that you have power. And maybe parallel with that, know that everything we know from 40 years of research on college student success is that what students do in college is the stuff that defines their success after college. And the college that they go to, especially the relative prestige of that college, turns out it doesn't matter a lick. The other way to think about it is this: think back to college that you went to. You can remember a couple of kids that were brilliant, and you can remember a couple of kids that were knuckleheads. And those kids are still brilliant and they're still knuckleheads. There's a range of students at every institution. And it's really because it's a 4-year stretch, it's what students do in college that defines their success afterwards, which means you can pick whatever place you think fits. And that fit includes financial fit, so that the student doesn't have debt when they finish.
All right, thank you. Yes, it's very interesting. It's a concept or a way of thinking of college that I think is obviously it's really new because of all of the changes that are happening.
Yeah.
So we appreciate and thank you for that, for the
You bet.
presentation. If anyone has questions, additional questions as we wrap up here, feel free to put them into the chat. Otherwise, we will have this link available, as I mentioned before, on our website. The recording will be available on Monday of next week. We also have additional Back on Track events happening tomorrow morning. I think tomorrow is the final day of our Back on Track event. We want to thank all of these partners that we've worked with and have come together to provide such a great opportunity for our students in Iowa and prospective college students. And one last thing, there is the Golden Circle College Fair on this Sunday, September 26th. It's located in Altoona at Prairie Meadows Conference Center. So please go check that out if you're in the area, or if you're looking to make a trip to Des Moines, the Des Moines area, please check that out. Mark, thank you. Thank you again for joining us this morning. It was great to hear all of this information, and we appreciate your time with us.
Have a great rest of the day.
Enjoy the rest of your day.